bogged down by this financial crisis and about the non-transparent government and all this kind of stuff. But it actually makes me wonder whether Bigelow is for real or whether he's part of the game, the big game.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing is, let's get this space program of China into perspective.
Because you could stamp anything you want.
Let's get the China space program into perspective. Now, let me tell you exactly where it is. It is no further than the U.S. Gemini program of the 1960s.
Yes.
That's exactly where China is now. It is not further than that. It is about that level.
Now, let's be clear. Let's be clear about that. You're exactly right, because it was just, last week that they had managed to do, an unmanned docking of 2 ships or something like that.
That's what they've done. I mean, they've done, prior to 2007, they've done spacewalk.
Yes.
2007, they launched Chang'e 1, October 2007, I think it was. It was really a moon observation mission, and then it was intentionally crashed onto the moon, and they left it there.
Right.
Then they launched Chang'e 2 in October 2010. Now, this is quite interesting because it builds up to what I'm going to sort of tell you about. Chang'e 2 took photos of the moon. It had incredible high resolution and very advanced cameras which could take the resolution down to one square meter. Now, you can imagine 1 square meter, you can see a hell of a lot.
Sure.
Its other purpose was to look for a landing site for the 2013 mission for, putting down a robotic lander and sort of going around the moon. So you got to ask yourself, we've got all this hype now about, China's got all these ambitions and it's going to the moon and it's going to mine and take over the moon and rent out land, according to Bigelow, and rent out infrastructure for other people. But you've got to really understand one very, very important point about this whole moon issue, period. And that is, it is controlled by America. End of story. America shows you the respectable face of the moon mission, which is NASA, and doesn't show you anything at all about the secret space program. So we're all sitting here talking about, Japan, India, everybody going to the moon. The fact is that the moon has many artifacts on it. The moon, in all likeliness, has human bases. The moon, without doubt, if you look at the Adamski work, if you look at the disclosures from the Disclosure Project by Sergeant Carl Wolf, and even the film by Jose Escamillo, has bases which are perhaps not human. Now, you can't tell me that China, with its high-resolution cameras, have not seen these things on the moon.
Exactly.
And you can't tell me that the Japanese, who have also circled the moon, taken pictures, have not seen artifacts on the moon. And you also can't tell me that India, who have their own space program, have also not seen artifacts on the moon. And also, in the background to all this, we have the Hubble telescope, etc., which never takes pictures of the moon. It could take incredible pictures of the moon.
Oh, gosh, Neil, I wanted to bring up the Hubble telescope so many times in these discussions. Exactly.
Well, so we're looking at a game. And one thing that the countries that I've mentioned have in common, they're all members of the nuclear club. The IAEA, they're all members of the nuclear club.
That's right.
And the nuclear club also manifests itself with a respectable front, which is the International Atomic Energy Agency, which really supposedly represents all these nations, but it has its core members, which are powers, that allow the signatories to go into space and give them restrictions on what they can do. For example, they take photographs. Those photographs are sanitized.
Mm-hmm. Of course they are.
So all this nonsense about China taking over and going ahead and et cetera, this is all very nice story. Very nice.
It is.
It's a matter of national security for America and her close allies to be totally in control of the moon and to be totally in control of Mars, where they would have strategic advantages over the rest of us.
Clearly. Now let me double back onto a couple of points. First of all, let me get you to just quickly comment, because one name I didn't hear get thrown out was Richard Hoagland. What do you think of Hoagland and Hoagland's work on the moon? I am, a little bit still undecided, but boy, it's a pretty convincing case he puts out on a lot of points.
Well, Hoagland has one advantage over most of us that we don't have, and that's the brain power and the computing power of his mind.
Sure.
And when he talks about hyperdimensional physics, I think there's a lot in that. And one of the good things that he does, he speculates a lot. I mean, I know a lot of people get disappointed. I mean, they talk about Comet Elenin and something great happening, and this recent battleship-sized asteroid going past the moon, that we should watch it change course.
Yeah, what, just last night or something? Right.
Yes, I mean, whether it does or doesn't, at least the guy sticks his neck out, speculates, and opens up these, what I call them exopolitical topics, because in some way or other they're related to the control mechanisms behind everything that underpins this planet.
Yeah.
So whether he's right or not, he might not be correct in terms of some of his predictions, but it's just amazing how his 19.5 and all the other geometry that he associates with the trajectories and with the arrival of some of these celestial bodies, and with the geometries that he talks about on the moon and on Mars. So we can't discount Hoagland at all.
The other main point, and it's, boy, you made a lot of loaded statements there, and I say that with regards to the fact that you used a lot of language that's hard to, to penetrate. I'm not trying to necessarily contradict what it is that you're saying. The idea that America is sort of in charge, that it's a big national security issue and the like, that all makes a lot of sense to me. I would think that from China's perspective, however, that would be a great point to attack in the national security of the United States. The idea that if we all look up in the sky and we look at the moon, and it's not about American astronauts going there, it's about Chinese astronauts being there, that really changes the world view. That's a phrase you like to use a lot too, that I picked up a lot on in our previous interview, that whole world view concept. China could really shift the balance entirely with those aspirations, so we definitely shouldn't be writing that off. Do you agree with that? I'm
not as convinced about the power of China with regard to the moon as everybody else is. I think that the moon is, use the term, incredibly inhabited by elements, terrestrial and non-terrestrial elements associated with the military-industrial complex. Okay, so and, there's a lot more to resolve before we get to such a basic take on the issue, is what you're saying. Well, you also have to look at, if you go deeper into the whole issue of NASA and the U.S. military and the military-industrial complex, you have to understand that there are technology transfer programs between extraterrestrials and NASA and the military. And I've even did an interview in one of my YouTube films with Philip de Misezera, a very close associate and ex-intelligence officer, worked with Dr. Michael Wolff. Now, this is whether you believe the Wolff story or not. But he attests to the fact that NASA have and are working with non-terrestrials, extraterrestrials. So when you've got a program, a space program that's very, very advanced in high technology, and it's tainted by extraterrestrials, then you're talking about exotic technology, wild technology beyond the imagination, which is so far out there that I don't even think the Chinese would have a hope in hell of ever catching up. Right. Yeah. So they are just really the new kids on the block, and they've just had a little room rented out to them. That's a pretty fair point. That's a pretty fair point, Neil. I got to give you that. That's a pretty fair take on it, because essentially, no matter how advanced we want to think that maybe they could have jumped ahead, it's still, exponentially behind where the ETs could possibly. Then you've got to ask yourself a very, very important question: who and what is Bigelow? Yes, thank you for going back to that. Yeah, if we could talk about that for another minute or two, and then I'll wrap this up, because I didn't want to keep you on too long. But what is your impression on that? I was surprised at your reaction earlier. Well, here's a very powerful man, and the same with the Virgin Atlantic guy. These are both very powerful people with aspirations of going into space. Now, once again, it's very difficult to think that people are just going to be able to get into their rockets and fly up into space and take people around and just pay a quick visit to the moon for a holiday. You have to be part of this elite club. To be part of the elite club, you have to be compromised. So let people draw their own conclusions who all these people are.
Bigelow has a pretty big stake in the aerospace, that commercial aerospace industry too. Are you aware that he's maybe directly involved with Spaceport America out there in, what is that, New Mexico, Arizona?
Well, the point is, all these people can be given contracts. And when you're given big, juicy, luscious contracts, you're basically owned. So, this is a very, very complicated, multi-layered topic we're talking about with regard to the moon. We're talking about a very strategic part of exopolitics, of exopolitical aspirations. It's very complicated. And then you've also got to ask yourself, what is the moon? This is another very important question. What is the moon? You were born and you grew up and you were told what the moon is. But there are a lot of anomalies with regard to the moon that people don't even think about or take into account. For example, during a total eclipse, I find it rather strange that the sun and the moon are exactly congruent.
Yeah.
I also find it very strange that the moon always faces you.
Yes.
And I also find it very strange that the moon is putting out all sorts of biorhythms with regard to tides and life on this planet and perhaps, the liquid in the human body. There are a lot of things relating to the moon. And one can go deeper and deeper and deeper into this whole subject that eventually the space program becomes irrelevant. The moon seems to be a real big important control factor with regard to life on this planet, whether it's biological, whether it's technical, whatever. And we know it is full of artifacts.
Yeah, well,
so
the forensic evidence seems to argue that case. There is forensic evidence that argues that case to a point where somebody like me that was trying to take a look at it from just a basic forensics point of view realized right away that the evidence was so overpowering and so overwhelming that it becomes extremely difficult for people on the so-called, scientific side of things, the mainstream scientific side of things, to refute, most of what you're saying or what Hoagland is saying and so on and so forth. It's pretty amazing. I know that people that are longtime listeners of Coast and some of these other shows will have heard these discussions time and time again, but the recent news, the involvement of China was the thing that really, struck a chord with me because politically, geopolitically speaking, that is already a big issue. China, you could turn on any news network. It does not matter which one you flip on here in the United States. China is going to be like every fifth or eighth story. There's going to be something about China that pops up. And the way that our two nations are now intertwined, it really, again, that type of a story of something as shocking as the moon caught a lot of interest. But, again, you're saying Bigelow's involvement immediately calls into question. With another maybe minute or so to go here, Neil, let me just ask you, what is his interest maybe? Is it just strictly financial, economic maybe interest, or do you think there's something else there that Richard Bigelow is after?
Well, of course,
Robert Bigelow, Robert Bigelow.
When things get going on the moon, there'll be private subcontractors needed to come on there and mine, do further exploration, further mining, further building. Who knows? I'm sure they're already mining on the moon.
Right.
So he wants to be, it's a new frontier for making money. China sees it that way, and the Americans will allow them in if they play ball. And, of course, all these entrepreneurs, one by one, are lining up, and as long as they behave themselves and look straight ahead and not side to side and keep their mouth shut and play the game, they can come up there and make money, and that's the next frontier.
I would hope that you and I could both live another 2 centuries to see how this all plays out, and unfortunately, I'm not thinking that's going to happen, but it's pretty interesting stuff. So, all right, Neil, listen, I'm going to let you go. I appreciate you taking the time to join us, especially on this sort of offset of time zones and all that kind of thing. We're going to talk to you again soon, and the rest of that interview with you from a few weeks ago, which I have to say was just absolutely fantastic, is all up on YouTube, and we'll be plugging this through the rest of the show. So thank you very much for joining us. I really appreciate your time tonight.
Thanks a lot, Mike.